Fantasy Zone for Sega Master System is an excellent example of how a classic scrolling shooter can stand out for its originality and innovation, while maintaining a solid technical foundation. Released in 1986, the game was developed by Sega and is part of a series that helped define the company's creative identity. Let's see in detail the various aspects that make this title unique. The heart of Fantasy Zone is made up of the typical mechanics of shoot 'em up games, where the player controls a spaceship, Opa-Opa, in a free-scrolling environment. The game world is not limited to simple horizontal scrolling. Instead, the levels are multi-directional, allowing the player to move left and right freely. This introduces an unusual exploration dynamic for the genre, requiring the player to search and destroy specific enemy bases in order to access the end-of-level boss. Enemy bases, or generators, are spread across fairly large maps, and the player must balance attack with defense, as enemies continue to respawn as long as the bases are not destroyed. Each level has a number of generators to eliminate before facing the boss. This design system creates a non-linear structure, breaking with the tradition of rigid scrolling levels. One of the most distinctive features of the game is the economic system. By defeating enemies, the player collects coins which can be spent at flying shops that appear throughout the game. These shops allow you to purchase improved weapons, such as missiles, bombs or lasers, and temporary upgrades such as increased speed or the ability to fly longer without overheating. This introduces an element of resource management that was quite unusual for games at the time, adding a layer of strategy. It's important to decide when and how to spend coins to optimize survival in later levels. Some power-ups are temporary, adding further strategic tension. The player must choose the right moment to activate more powerful weapons, as using them too early or too late could be useless against bosses. Fantasy Zone bosses are another highlight of the game. Each level ends with a boss fight against enormous creatures with bizarre shapes, which follow unique and complex attack patterns. These bosses require skill in both movement and marksmanship, and often change phases during the fight, increasing the difficulty as their health decreases. Fantasy Zone's difficulty increases progressively, with subsequent levels introducing new enemies and obstacles, as well as bosses with increasingly intricate attack patterns. Resource management becomes crucial, as upgrades gained through the in-game economy can make the difference between victory and defeat. Graphically, Fantasy Zone makes the most of the capabilities of the Sega Master System. The levels are made with a bright and saturated color palette, which gives the game a cartoonish, almost surreal look. Sprites are large, detailed, and fluidly animated, and enemy and boss designs stand out for their originality, with whimsical creatures ranging from flying plants to giant mechanical creatures. The audio sector is equally memorable, with a cheerful and captivating soundtrack, composed of short and catchy melodies that remain in your memory. The music changes during boss fights, increasing the tension and intensity of the action. The sound effects, although limited by the technical capabilities of the hardware, are well synchronized with the gameplay and help make the action more dynamic.
Fantasy Zone for Sega Master System is an explosion of color and arcade madness that drags the player into a surreal and dreamlike world. At first glance, it looks like a classic side-scrolling shooter, but in reality it's a psychedelic journey that blends brilliant graphics, bizarre characters, and fluid action that defies the conventions of the genre. The player takes control of Opa-Opa, a flying ship that looks more like a small egg with wings, tasked with destroying enemy bases spread across vibrant levels full of strange creatures. But it's not just visual chaos, each level is a microcosm perfectly balanced between strategy and pure reaction, where the player must collect coins from defeated enemies to upgrade their shuttle. This economic dynamic introduces unprecedented depth, as the accumulation and management of resources becomes crucial to surviving increasingly frenetic attacks. The soundtrack is equally eccentric, with upbeat and hypnotic melodies that accompany the player as they navigate bizarre spaceships and giant bosses. Fantasy Zone is a unique mix of strangeness and skill, where visual and sonic creativity combines with rigorous gameplay, creating an experience that seems to defy every rule of the classic shooter.
Fantasy Zone is not only a reference point for arcade games and the Sega Master System, but also a title that influenced numerous subsequent games. The combination of an economic system, freedom of movement and original artistic design make it one of the most innovative titles of its time. The high difficulty, combined with the need to manage power-ups and resources, makes it a challenging but rewarding game, which has won a large number of fans and continues to be appreciated by retro gaming enthusiasts. In summary, Fantasy Zone is a brilliant example of creativity and innovation in scrolling game design, combining fast-paced action with unprecedented strategic depth, delivering a unique and iconic gaming experience.